Yeah. So I don't know why that happened last week.
First matches are in the books, and we're live now. Episode 137. You have to break it all down. Yep. A post. And Twitch. YouTube. Bingo. Refresh YouTube. Bongo. Alrighty. Tweets are good.
Did you put the standings in here?
No.
I'll put them at the bottom, right above the pick'em.
Okay.
Get the stop the count memes back. Carolina just wins champs from here. Definitely the bottom three teams we all expected: Atlanta, Vegas, and Cloud9.
Mm-hmm. Let me test Twitch audio. Yeah, that sounds good. All right, I'm good.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 137 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking the Call of Duty League. The CDL is finally and officially back for Season 5, I believe. And we're covering all the matches from Week 1 of the Major 1 qualifiers. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Like you said, pretty good week of first matches. We had some decent NFL action today with a tough, hard-fought battle between my Steelers and your Brownies. And if anybody watching the live show tonight sees me suddenly burst into flames or get super excited because of Juan Soto news, that is potentially on the docket too. So I apologize in advance if that happens mid-show.
When he signs for $800 million with the New York Mets, is basically
Yes.
how it's going to go. Well, we'll see how that goes. We'll see if you do combust at some point during the podcast. And if you want to see that for yourself on video, then you could check out the YouTube channel or maybe the VOD on Twitch if you are so inclined. But I think the biggest thing that we have to talk about on today's show is Atlanta FaZe, because obviously they are undoubtedly one of the greatest CDL teams ever. At least this franchise has been consistently dominant in the regular season, one of the contenders for the world championship at pretty much every single point in the CDL's history. But this week, the first week of the new season of the CDL, was not Atlanta FaZe's best week by any means. They go 0-2 in week 1 of the 2025 CDL season. Let's just start there. Is that a big deal to you, or what do you make of this performance by FaZe in week 1?
No, I think the biggest thing is it's not like they're going 0-2 against two teams that are anticipated to be some of the worst in the league. They lost to Toronto, who in our power rankings and the coaches polls and whatever was a top 5 team, probably like fourth, fifth in most people's eyes. And LA Thieves, who is anywhere from 1 to 3 after this weekend, it's kind of looking like 1. But again, it's still really early. We're going to talk about all of these matches. I mean, there's some other upsets in there that we definitely did not see coming, and I don't think it's like massive red flag or panic button time to press the panic button or anything like that. But it's definitely interesting that FaZe dropped both of these matches. The way LA Thieves was playing this week, I'm not really uh, super surprised they lost to them. I do think, especially, um, they lost the first 2 maps to the Thieves, and I believe they went down to 0-2 in the control, and then they come back in the control, almost pull off a reverse sweep by pushing it to a game 5, just weren't able to close it out there. So they were competitive with the Thieves, especially in maps 3, 4, and 5. So that's a little bit of a better sign. The Toronto series was kind of a head scratcher to me, just in terms of they look good map one, and then after that it was really just all Toronto. The tissue was definitely an issue, especially in map four there. But big picture for FaZe, some of their upcoming matches, they play against Carolina, they play against the Vegas Falcons, they play against Minnesota, Boston Breach, and Cloud9. So I think with those 5 matches remaining, if they have a losing record in these online qualifiers for Major One, then yeah, maybe we can start having a conversation about like what's going on there and stuff. But um, based on that, I mean, if they are able to play the way that we know they're capable of, it's very possible they end 5-2 in these qualifiers and just win the next 5, and we're having a totally different conversation. So, long-winded answer, but no, I'm not necessarily worried about Atlanta. Definitely interesting that they lost to Toronto in the fashion they did. Based on the way the Thieves played, not entirely surprised. They just kind of took that one, and Thieves looked pretty good this weekend. So, tough start to the season, but obviously I expect these boys to turn things around pretty soon.
It would be easy to overreact because we only have these 2 matches to go off of for FaZe and a lot of these other teams as well. But I agree with you. We can't overreact, and we can't judge FaZe as if this is like a new team or these players haven't proven to be able to even turn it around. There were points in various seasons over the past few years where they were downright bad at some points. They were losing matches that they just shouldn't have. Which, you can say that with the Toronto match. I don't think the LAT thing is unexpected by any means because, I think everyone understood if LAT won that match or if FaZe won that match. I think it was a very evenly matched teams in that. The Toronto one, like you mentioned, is not concerning. I don't want to say that, but it's an interesting result because, like you said, they come out, they beat Toronto by 109 points in hardpoint, and then they just don't look nearly that good for the rest of the series. CleanX was excellent for pretty much the entire series, I think. So he drops 33 in game 4, the clincher, but he had lobby high 25 in the control. He had 10 kills, which is the highest in S&D. So he was definitely the star of the show for Toronto, but you can't count out some of these other guys. Beans had 28 in the second hard point. Even Kleenex had 22 in the first hard point. I'm surprised at that result, but it is week 1. They had probably the hardest schedule of any team in the CDL for week 1. So maybe, like you said, the competition is probably not going to get much harder, until they play Optic or something, and maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But it's something to watch. I'm a little surprised that FaZe is 0-2, but with the competition that they faced, it probably shouldn't be that surprising. Optic, though, we have to talk about them because that was Boston has competed well against many teams in the past. Last year, we talked about on the last pod, I think I said they had 12 Game 5 losses, and I think they were 2-12. So 14 matches went to Game 5s. That's a lot, but in the end, they lost most of them. Well, Boston goes to Game 5 as they are accustomed to do, and they go to Game 5 in the first match, or their first match of the new CDL season against Optic, and they beat Optic in Game 5. They win both search and destroys in this series, 12-5 round count between those two S&Ds. Boston also won the second hard point in the series. Optic won the opening hard point, just a slaughter in the first map. They win the control to go up 2-1, and then they end up losing this series. Again, we can't overreact. We can't say, oh my God, the defending world champions, they're chalk. They, get rid of them, break up the team or anything. But what do you make of that result? And obviously they did have a win later in the weekend. So, but what do you make of that result in particular against Boston?
I mean, that's just just a massive shock, right? It's literally the team that won champs against the 12th place team, and the 12th place team from last year wins. Obviously, a different roster than that 12th place team for Boston, but um, yeah, totally unexpected on my end. I think just about anybody will tell you that they were not expecting Boston to beat Optic. I think there's some rumors floating around about Shots either being sick or having pink eye, and I think I saw a clip of like Scump saying that Shotsy left his controller in the bathroom at the Hex quarters or whatever, and Scump's like, I'm not touching that thing. So, there might be some, illness or whatever going on in their Optic. Not making excuses or anything. I think Boston played pretty well, all things considered, and um, that's like kind of just an opportunity. Like I've talked about it on this podcast before. Like you don't want to play against a really good team to start off the season, yada yada. But like to play devil's advocate to that point, I make so much time when you're in a situation like this for Boston, 12th place against first place from the previous year. Like you have nothing to lose. Like I said, almost everyone is expecting them to lose, so they go out there, they get to play free. Worst case scenario, they lose, and that's what everyone was expecting, right? So maybe that had something to do with it. They were just, they went in with a, an effort mentality and just doing what they want to do and played free and loose, and that might have, helped them out in the long run. But yeah, definitely unexpected result overall. It was pretty funny. Obviously, the flank is live right now, so I didn't get to uh, hear what Aches had to say about Optic's follow-up performance, but I know Aches brought up the old "is Shotzi a superstar" conversation in the episode after Optic lost to the Boston, because he said a superstar should never lose to a 12th place team from the previous year. I thought it was pretty funny that he brought that back up, and obviously, that's like kind of you were saying with FaZe. I can't put too much stock into just a couple matches, and let alone just the first match of the year. But yeah, definitely was not expecting to be talking about Boston upsetting Optic on this podcast at all. There was no universe where I ever was picking Boston to win that. No universe where I was thinking it was possible, but here we are.
Well, that superstar stuff has to go out the window after the second series that Optic had, because today on Sunday they play Cloud9. Shotzi was like the best player in the world during that series. 1.87 KD. For the weekend, he had the highest KD of any player in the CDL with a 1.43. He was like, if he had pink eye, like he needs to get pink eye every single weekend. Like there's no chance that guy should be that good. He really wasn't the problem this weekend, and he wasn't dropping like huge numbers last season, which is, kind of the reason that the superstar stuff came up. Was, back when he was with the Dallas Empire, it was like, well, Shotzi's the guy, he's the go-to slayer, and he really hasn't been relied upon in that role to that extent, at least. But this weekend he was. It was really Kenny. Like his stats really, as you can expect, were not up to par, and he didn't play well in some of those maps. But still, to lose to Boston, they look like two completely different teams. I don't know what that is about Optic, because that is kind of a trend with them over the years, that like last season we even saw that before champs. They looked like one of the worst teams in the CDL, and then they get to LAN, and then they are literally the best team in the world, and they win champs. I'm not sure why that is, but it has definitely become a trend for Optic. And I mean, if you can win the last match, then it doesn't really matter, I guess. But Boston, like let's keep it on this team for right now. Boston, they beat Optic, obviously, so that's a great win. That's already, I think they're already 20% toward their season total from last season, which feels ridiculous to say, but I think they only had 5 wins last season, so they're almost a fifth of the way there. But they already now have 2 Game 5s under their belt as well. They beat Optic in the first Game 5, and then the second Game 5, they lose to, I believe, Vancouver. Lost to Minnesota, and they lose in round 11, which just feels cruel to get the breach that close. What did you think of Boston this weekend and this roster, which we definitely did not give a lot of hype to or a lot of credit to, because a lot of these guys are trying to prove themselves, at least at this point in their careers. So what did you make of the breach this weekend?
Side note: Juan Soto just signed with the Mets for $765 million. So, but yeah,
I
back on
didn't see
track.
any fire, so it didn't really happen.
Um, so with Boston, I mean, I know we definitely like rated them lowly and stuff, but I know at least once I said it and brought up the notion that this team played better at the Esports World Cup than the previous Boston roster that competed for them throughout the whole CDL and all of its iterations. That's really not like a lofty, you know,
Low bar.
achievement
Yeah.
or low bar. Um, so I know we've talked about it really, but like they definitely coming into this weekend, just beating Optic alone is, you know, enough to say like, hey, yeah, this team maybe has a lot more potential than the previous roster. Again, not saying too much. But then
Mhm.
you go into the second match where they're competitive once again and not necessarily against a team of the same caliber of Optic in Minnesota, even though Minnesota had a really good start to the season here. Um, but to see that like this wasn't like a previous Boston team where they went into a match and it's just a total letdown. They just got smoked and it was over. Like Boston was competitive and they were hanging around and literally like you said a round 11 game 5 round 11 away from us having a conversation them being 2-0 after the first week of the 2025 season. So really an impressive showing. I mean, you could go down the list for all the guys. Snoopy had, you know, played pretty well. Awake and Purge had moments. I think Purge played better in Search, if I remember correctly. Just thinking, trying to think of the stats off the top of my head.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, that's interesting that that's how the season starts for Boston. And it's kind of like, where do they go from here, right? Like, if they start losing, is it it's just the same old Boston, or if they keep winning or remain competitive, it's like okay, yeah, things have changed. Like, is Snoopy developing? Is Cammy back on
Mhm.
Treyarch title MVP? Cammy, is he back? Big Wake, is he back? Is this the real Purge after his rookie year where kind of bounced around, didn't have the strongest debut? Like, it's again we don't have too much of a sample size, and well, I guess technically with two matches we have the largest sample size possible for
Yeah.
Boston, but nonetheless, it's just interesting that this is where the conversation sits around Boston right now, because if it was last year, it would probably just a different tone, and I mean, we might not even be talking about Boston. There are sometimes we just skip over Boston matches, like, yeah, Boston got 3 out, and that's the end of the story. But I think even as we're going through these matches and these teams, like I don't want to skip ahead too much, but even a team like Vegas that a lot of people were not having high expectations for, they were competitive and arguably more competitive than some teams or some pundits might have thought. So could be a result of the game, which that's been a case in the past, but it could also just be that the skill gap or whatever is closing, and some of these guys are the talent is rising. We're cutting down the number of pro players is as low as it's ever been, just because there's no expansion still, and
Mhm.
we added the team with Vegas, so there's less North American players in the league than ever before. So it's like, is this like just going to be the year where we see the most talent on display? And maybe that's the case. And it's where you have teams like Boston, who weren't great last year, putting up strong performances against a team like Optic that literally won champs. So I don't know. I don't want to babble too much on it, but again, like you said, small sample size, only 2 matches, but definitely an encouraging start for Boston.
Something that we might have overlooked, and not saying necessarily you and me, but just kind of like the scene as a whole. Um, Something we might have overlooked is the fact that these four players, speaking for Boston, they have to be as hungry as ever to prove themselves and prove that they are worthy to be on CDL teams. Each of these four players have been doubted to a considerable extent probably, and have been out of the CDL at some point or on the verge of being out of the CDL. Snoopy, I think, is the only one at this point who hasn't been down to challengers in the last year or so. But he has been maligned to the extent that people are calling for him to be demoted to challengers. So I think that might be an underrated part of Boston, is that they all have something to prove, and they have something to prove together. And maybe that will kind of galvanize them and be able to be enough to kind of get them by. And another part is they all have CDL experience, and that CDL experience might be, a little bit, Purge doesn't have as much as Cammy, for example, but Purge did have valuable experience last season with Vegas, and they won matches when he was in the lineup, even though he was also pretty maligned during that period as well. So I just think it's a really interesting team. Obviously, I'm kind of pulling for Boston because you never want to see a team be in last place consistently, unless it's like, Vegas or something where that they're not putting in as much effort in terms of like the behind the scenes stuff. But like Boston, granted, all their behind the scenes stuff is in question now, but before then I never questioned their commitment to Call of Duty. And I hope that these guys, especially considering all of them were on the edge of the CDL and challengers, they're, if they succeed, they can kind of stick around, and they're all young guys to a certain extent. So, I think it'd be cool if they were able to be competitive on a consistent basis, but I guess we'll see. Another team that we talked about in the preview was Carolina, and we talked about them in the sense that for the majority of this team, not Gwen, obviously, but 3/4 of this team, is this the last chance for these guys? Talking about Slasher, TJ, and Vivid. We asked, is there another team out there that's going to take these guys if this doesn't work out with Carolina? Well, week 1, it's worked out about as well as it possibly could have. They are 2-0. They have the best win-loss, I believe, of any team. Maybe LAT might have snubbed them at the very top, but it's pretty incredible, in all honesty. Carolina goes 2-0. They were very up and down last season. Slasher wasn't in the CDL for most of the last season. Vivid has been in and out of the CDL. And they looked very good. Granted, we should talk about the Vegas match because, I think you're onto something with Vegas. Like, they looked competitive, but I'm also not sure of their competition and if Vegas will be able to be competitive with some of the top level teams on a consistent basis. But what did you make of Carolina? Is it too soon to say that Carolina is winning champs?
I think it is too soon to say Carolina is winning champs, but
I'll get there next week.
What I don't think it's too soon to say is Slasher is back. Slasher played incredible this weekend, and as I say that, maybe it is too soon to say it again, like based on who he's playing against. Like, he does this against your FaZes, Optics, and LA Thieves, then I think you can definitely cement the Slasher is back. But no, Slasher played incredible this week, and I just think that's definitely worth mentioning. Kind of like you said, like the Vegas versus Carolina match was a little closer than I thought. Like the second hard point in particular was a 14-point win, and it looked like for a stretch of that Vegas was going to win. It was back and forth towards the end. The first hard point wasn't as close as the second hard point, but it was still the second closest map of the series, and then Vegas looked really strong in the search, and I was thinking in the back of my head, oh great, here we go again, a Carolina team where I say that they should be really good in search. And you could make the argument that on paper, with the names that this Carolina team has, that they should be an even better search team than what we were saying last year about Carolina, when I kept on saying they should be a good search team, and they were up and down in search all year long. They lose this search to Vegas, and I'm just sitting here thinking, like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Like, we're going to go on the pod. I got to sit here and talk about how I thought Vegas or Carolina was going to be a good search team, and they're losing the Vegas Falcons in search. But no, and then Carolina dominates the control. I think there was some conversations on the broadcast and whatnot about just like control being a newer thing for the Saudi Arabian players and stuff. So that wouldn't, necessarily shock me if that's true, and that explains like a little bit of why the controls weren't necessarily extremely close for them this weekend. But nonetheless, I just think, yeah, Carolina in particular didn't play against the toughest teams. Second match against Gentlemates, like that's definitely on paper at least a tougher matchup than Vegas, and they were still able to get the win there. Slasher plays really well again, so um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's good to see for believers in this Carolina squad, and like you said, like having those conversations about some of these guys like Slasher, Vivid, TJ. Like, is this their last chance? Like, they don't got to worry about that. I'm not saying
Mhm.
they are worried about it, but like that doesn't even have to be a thought if Carolina performs. So, um, yeah, as good of a start as they could have hoped for, really, outside of a 6-0 map count. They'll have to settle for 6-2, but yeah, end of the day, they're 2-0 in matches, so they'll definitely sign up for that.
The second match is what I was really impressed by with Carolina. Like they, yeah, I guess you could say they struggle with Vegas to an extent, but they were pretty dominant against LAG. Like, they beat whatever Gentlemates by 90 in the first hard point. They beat him by 100 in the second hard point. 6-2 SND. They lose the control, but I mean, you look at Gwen, 1.39 KD, Slasher 1.2. They both had 97 total kills in that series. If they can play at a consistent level as a duo and they can play at a really high level, they're going to be very, very difficult to beat. Granted, that is a big if. We haven't seen Slasher at the top level. We saw him at certain points with FaZe at the top level, but I think we all want to see it now, and if he can do it with the supporting cast, and if Gwen can continue to ascend, this team has a way higher ceiling than I think anyone would have imagined when the roster was announced. But also, I'm not entirely sure what to make of Gorillamates, Gentlemates. Like, the team was extremely disappointing for week one. This was a team that I thought could really compete for the fourth place spot, and they very may well do that. But this week was not their week. I think we should talk about them in that first match. They played the opening CDL match of the season, and I think they really lost that match more than Minnesota won it. And that's not to take anything away from the Rocker, but I just felt like LAG kind of threw away that S&D. They threw away a few. They almost came back in the hard point, which would have been an incredible that first map of the CDL season, and it's a 250-243 banger where Minnesota barely hangs on. They were up 244-206, and LAG comes storming back, gets within about 50 points, or gets within about 10 points, and nearly win it. An incredible map, but I came away from this weekend being more disappointed in LAG than a lot of. I didn't think that was going to be the case. What did you make of their performances this weekend?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily look at it that same way. I think there were some moments in particular. I thought Linz in that first series against Minnesota played pretty well, and that was like one of the talking points for us heading into this season was just like Lynn's quote unquote stepping into the Hydra role
Yeah.
on the 2023 New York Subliners champs winning squad. So to see him have those strong performances, even though it didn't result in a win, like it wasn't like a total, you know, just absolute stomping and they got spit on and we're talking about them making roster changes already situation there. So that was at least encouraging for me. I do think um, you can make the argument that LAG should have won both of those matches. Like on paper, we both picked them to beat Minnesota. At least I don't even remember my reasoning for picking Carolina over Gentlemates in our pick 'em, but I did. So you obviously expected them to go 2-0, and I wouldn't be surprised if a majority of people did as well. So from that perspective, I can understand how you could say it was. You know, disappointing or just not what you were expecting, but there were at least some flashes in there um for Gentlemates where it's like, not everything is all doom and gloom for them early on. Would have obviously if you're a supporter, and I will say on that note too, I believe like first match of the year, the Go Taga co-stream had like over 60K uh, viewers or whatever it was. So that was encouraging to see as well. And that that you could argue that's an even more important aspect than the result of the match. Like a new French team coming in and drawing more eyes to the CDL. Like how much of a win is that over the actual win of the match? That's semantics, and we could probably argue that for hours. But yeah, nonetheless, speaking COD and speaking results in the server, you can argue it was disappointing performance for Gentlemates to kick off the 2025 season, but I will say that there were still some encouraging signs, especially for me. Seeing Lens have some solid performances, that's encouraging.
Yeah, and I think it might be a chemistry issue as well. Obviously, this is a championship trio with Priesta, Skies, and Kismet, but they were not together last season. Priesta was bouncing around and didn't get to play with NYSL. Lynn's coming in. This is a completely new team to him, so maybe it will take a little bit of time. I was similarly encouraged by some of the things that happened, especially in S&D. I thought it just looked like there were certain moments that they were prepared for it, but they were just kind of like a little bit off timing. Like even I think it was the game 5 round 11, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Kismet went like half a second or a second too early, like, or Linz was half a second or a second too late, and they don't get the trade. They don't win. I think it was a 2v2, and that was pretty much the difference maker in that match. So maybe that's something that can get cleaned up pretty easily with just a little bit more time. Another team that I would like to talk about is the team that I just mentioned, was Minnesota. I think we were both questioning where was the leadership necessarily going to come from, or if it was going to be Looney, how would that translate into the actual matches? And it turns out it translated pretty well in week 1. They go 2-0. Obviously, some pretty clutch performances. That LAG series, Estriel clutches up in the control. He goes on a 7 kill streak in round 5. They were tied 12-12 in lives, and they ended up winning like 10-0 in the lives department in round 5. Just a really good series. They win that round 11. And anything that jumps out to you? Obviously, Minnesota's I think they are probably one of the bigger wild cards coming into the season, because we weren't entirely sure where the floor was or where the ceiling was with this team.
No, and I think again the thing with Minnesota that I mentioned was I really I liked some of the players on the team and the potential there for what they could do. I definitely wasn't expecting 2 wins out of them for opening week, although they did play against Boston and we both picked them there, but we obviously both picked Gentlemates to beat them in that opening match, which didn't happen. I just think, yeah, I mean, 2 game 5 round 11 victories is 2 rounds of searching away from 0-2 versus being 2-0. It's a really good sign though to see a team like Minnesota, who we were bringing up, these young players who didn't have a ton of CDL experience. How will they perform without a quote unquote like veteran IGL sort of deal? To see them perform in those round 11s and in those searches and clutch up when necessary, that's a really great sign to see right off the bat. I don't remember what match it was, but Paul X did a post-game interview after one of their games, and he kind of alluded to his time with the Subliners when he played with Crim 6, and he's like, a lot of people forget about that. I learned a lot from him, and that's obviously great to hear, because if you get an opportunity to play with one of the best Call of Duty players of all time, you want to be a sponge in that situation and take away as much as you can. But to think about like Paul X being the IGL for this team, like that's not something that for anyone really it's going to jump out and be like, oh yeah, this team's going to the top now because they got Paul X as the IGL. But it's something that you can build off of, and if he was able to learn anything from Crimsix in his short amount of time that helps translate into wins now for that team, and they're able to build off of that, that's just a really good thing to see right off the bat and to build on. And I just think, especially you look at the stats for both of these series, like in the Gentlemate series, they were all 4 players in Minnesota were in the negatives. That's just gonna be part of the situation there when Yeah, they win one hard point in that one. So was it two? So they win two searches against Boston. So they went 3-1 in search. But nonetheless, when you're you know playing multiple searches and you're winning the series through S&D, it's not necessarily uncommon to see players having a negative KD on the positive, or a negative KD on the winning side and positive KDs on the losing side if the teams with the positive KDs are winning the respawns. I'm getting off track, but
Mhm.
um, regardless, I think that's just interesting when you look at the numbers. Like all four negative players for Minnesota in the win over General Mates. Only Paul X was positive in the win against Boston. But the key words there is they got two wins, and the stats don't matter in that case because you get the number in the win column instead of the loss column. So definitely interesting start for Minnesota from that perspective. I know Nero, I noted down, played well in a couple maps that again, like I said, him and Geo, if they're able to be consistent Star Slayers on a regular occurrence, like that's my idea for how this team's going to see success. But maybe it's just they continue to win Game 5 Round 11s, because if you win 100% of the Game 5 Round 11s you play, you're undefeated. So at least in those matches. But yeah, definitely a encouraging start for Minnesota.
Yeah, I think that's the right word to use, is encouraging. And if they're gonna have any chance of making champs, which I think they will, I think they'll be competitive in that. But if they want to go higher and compete for that, fourth, fifth spot, the key to doing that is beating the teams below you consistently. And however you do that is that's how you got to do it. We saw that last season. The reason that there was so much so many shakeups where it was like 5 through 10, 5 through 11, was because none of those teams could consistently beat each other. And so they were just cannibalizing in the middle of the pack. And that's why we had so much drama when we got to the end of the season. If Minnesota or any of those teams that are really trying to compete for that fourth or fifth spot, that's what they're going to need to do. They're going to need to win consistently against a team like LAG if they're going to be a little off kilter, or they're going to have to beat Boston or Vegas on a consistent basis. And, congrats to Minnesota. They did that this weekend. A team that I think is one of the more surprising 0-2s just by the team name alone and the amount of talent is Cloud9. But I do want to give them a little bit of grace, considering, I said at the beginning of the show that Atlanta probably had the hardest week one schedule. I want to take that back, and I want to say that Cloud9 had the hardest week one schedule. They come into the league. Obviously, this is the rebranded New York Subliners, a new team with only Sib being retained, and they play two of the very best teams, and you could argue the two best teams in LAT and Optic in week one. That is a killer's row, and they got killed. They win one map. They go 1-6 in map count this weekend. The only win being a comeback round 11 win against LAT. They get swept by Optic. They're pretty much blown off the map pretty much in every other map, which that might be a little concerning that they weren't even really close to winning these maps. How much do you make of that? How much do you put into these week one performances from Cloud9?
I think the one thing that jumped out, especially after Cloud9's loss to LA Thieves, was the whole like drama around the server situation and everything like that. So it is, we've talked enough about online COD and the drawbacks to just the nature of online matches versus LAN, et cetera, et cetera. The thing for me with this, I don't want to get too much into like the whole attach, like claiming like some server they used to play on. I think he said like a Denver server or something was
Yeah.
worse this year, and like it didn't work out as an option. Like
Yeah.
all that, regardless, just the fact that Cloud9, as far as I'm aware, at least, I believe this is like according to like that opening podcast that Cloud9's COD team did, or maybe it's just fugazi that I'm making up. I don't think it is, but as far as I'm aware, at least, I believe it was said that Cloud9 made the Call of Duty team moved to Los Angeles to compete. And I
Oh,
think,
really?
as far as I know, the team is in LA, and I believe they are living like Cloud9 has like either facilities or houses where they have like the LCS team. It's not the LCS anymore, whatever it is for League of Legends. Um, but like they have this set up there, and I believe that's where the team is living, like in a house near that, or like in like a community there, whatever it is. But just the notion of like them, I know Cloud9 is quote unquote new to Call of Duty and coming back and returning, but the players should have been able to say something like, look, in the current landscape of Call of Duty, teams, the majority of teams are playing in Texas, and teams that have competed from California in the past have been at a severe disadvantage in these online matches. The
Mm-hmm.
online matches are an important part of the schedule. Whether you agree with that or not, that's just not up for debate, because we can sit here and talk about it, but it is a reality that's not changing unless we somehow go back to the 2020 uh, home series schedule that just didn't pan out. Online matches are here to stay in some form, and having the team go to LA when like as a player signing with Cloud9, like someone like, again, I'm not going to put it on Attach, but Attach is like, the brand personality really here for the team, and he should be a veteran. We've talked about it, like one of the players who's been around now the longest of active players competing. He should have been able to talk to Jack and be like, look, I know you want us to be in Los Angeles with the Cloud9 where everything is going on. I think that is going to put us at a severe disadvantage in these online matches, and obviously if that puts us at a disadvantage, that could make our performance worse, that make things look worse for the brand, yada yada. That should have at least, again, that could have been a conversation. Cloud9 could have just been like, yeah, we don't care, we want you guys in LA.
Yeah.
Like, regardless, we don't know any of that. I just think, like, the fact that we're gonna sit here and again, these are tough matches that Cloud9 played, and you can't say like, maybe if they were on less of a ping disadvantage, maybe the matches are closer, maybe they win. Like, I guess you can say that, but at the end of the day, these were going to be tough matches for Cloud9 regardless. If we have Cloud9 out here losing to some other teams that on paper they should not be losing to, and that's because of like a ping disparity, then that changes the conversation a little bit. But I just think like it's a really tough situation where you know we don't know all the details and what's going on, but if the players weren't able to at least like express that competing from Los Angeles in these online matches that determine your seeding for the lands, and that could put us on the back foot and set us back to start the season, set us back going into the lands, put us in the losers bracket to start matches, et cetera, et cetera. I could ramble on that for a while, and I'm already getting worked up. But
Mm-hmm.
um, short answer, I just think it's tough to, you know, we've said it where there've been the matches where like LA is playing teams on the East Coast and it's lacrosse. When the Florida Mutineers were playing from Florida and playing against the LA teams, like saying like there were issues, like that's just always gonna be happening now with these online matches, and there's really nothing we can do about it. It's just an unfortunate situation and circumstance, but it is a reality, and that's just the situation that Cloud9 is going to have to deal with now for the rest of the year, unless there's some solution the league can come to either like fix those servers or find a server that's in between where these teams are all playing in Cali that's a little better connection wise for both people. I don't know what the solution is. End of the day, it's just these were two matches for Cloud9 that were going to be tough, even if they were on LAN, and I think it's tough. I
Well,
really don't know.
in Attach, he said that they were made to play on a combined 140 ping for the match against Optic or forfeit. And he said there's a server where the pings are even, but not allowed to play on that according to the CDL. So there's some kind of disconnect. Like,
Yeah, I didn't see that, so
so
that's even crazier.
that's the Optic one. Obviously, there were server problems with the Thieves match as well. I think overall, like you're hitting the nail on the head that like it is a C9 problem, like an organizational problem as well, that they're making, like, this is according to like one player or like, we don't know all of the details, I guess. But let's just say Cloud9 is making their players relocate to Los Angeles to play from LA rather than getting to pick where, they want to play, which would have been Dallas. Okay, like I see their point, but it's also not competitively viable, or it's going to be even harder on these teams. We've seen, LAT in the past, like they forced their guys to play from LA, and they would always complain, especially when they played like Atlanta, because that's literally cross country, and whatever server is gonna like be best is probably, be best for LA is probably not best for Atlanta, and vice versa, and it just causes all these issues, and it causes inconsistency, which is pretty much exactly what these Call of Duty players don't want. It creates inconsistency in the scrims because you're not getting as high quality of practice as you probably could if you were in Dallas scrimming other teams that are in Dallas. You're also, obviously the matches are very, very important. There's so many online matches in current CDL that you're just putting yourself at a huge disadvantage in terms of CDL points, and therefore how you're going to be seeded in the new minors, which are also online, and it's I believe a single elimination tournament, so it's even worse in that it only takes 3 maps and then you're out, and then you go to these majors and you might start in the losers bracket. Again, it only takes 3 maps at that point because you did so poorly in the online matches. Granted, I don't want to wave away some of the that this is the entire problem with C9, or that the reason that they lost to these two teams who are, like you said, this was going to be a tough matchup regardless of it was online or offline. But I think, it's a good point to raise that there's an issue here, and I mean, it's the issue with the modern CDL in a nutshell, that this is Cloud9 New York. These guys have been relocated to Los Angeles even though they want to play in Dallas. That is
you would assume, at least.
Yeah, they would probably be best suited to play from Dallas or near Dallas. That's kind of ridiculous in and of itself. Like there are 3 locations. None of, they're not going to play from New York. I think the Subliners did, I think like the very first season, and then I'm pretty sure they relocated to Dallas. It's all stupid. I believe like we have to figure this out. I don't know if like an LCS model is viable. I tend to think that's not viable, where you can relocate all of these players to one location and start playing from there on a consistent basis, or play LAN matches like we used to when they would go to Columbus or something similar. But I think something will eventually have to be done, or we're just going to keep running into these issues, which are brought up every single season by multiple teams typically. And it seems like C9 might be one of those teams that is at a major disadvantage, at least for the foreseeable future. We'll see if anything comes of that. But I do think it's an interesting point. But they're now 0-2, 1-6 in map count. They lost all 5 respawns, and they were not real close at any point. Another team that went 0-2 and 1-6 is a team that we expected that to probably happen with the Vegas Falcons. We talked about them real briefly. I just want to put kind of a pin in that with, obviously they did better than I think people expected them to. They didn't get completely wiped off the map. Like this was not like a, 100, like C9, they looked like how probably some people expected Vegas to look. Like it was so dominant, it was so one-sided. Vegas looked like just a normal, like below average CDL team. It didn't look really out of the ordinary. Was that kind of the read that you got from those 2 series?
I think, yeah, like Vegas in general, and like it's the guy whose name I don't think anybody really is totally sure how to say. I believe they were calling him Kicks on stream, and his name is Khaled, or some people were calling him Khaled before. I don't really know, but regardless, I'm pretty sure he was like statistically Vegas's best player for a majority of these series. Yeah, he had the 1.21 KD against Carolina, and then even against Miami, I'm pretty sure, yeah, 1.28 there. So I think the Miami series again, like the hard point was close, similar to what we saw with the map 4 against Carolina in the hard point, but outside of that, against Miami, it wasn't necessarily as close. I just think it was still closer than expected. Like we even said this dating back to the Esports World Cup. Like they played FaZe first round, and I literally said I'm like 100-point club, map 1, 6-1 in the search, 3-0 in the control, 20-minute DoorDash challenge series. See you later. And that wasn't what happened then, and that's not what happened in their series this weekend. So, um, obviously, still a team that it's early, and you can say the same statement for a lot of teams. But especially for these guys, all being rookies, all first time competing in against some of the best players in North America, competing in a whole different country. They got up only up from here to go. They definitely had some guys who were shooting incredibly straight, and that's obviously great to see. There's one in the search on Skyland. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Kicks, but he like snapped onto Slasher and like a very tight he was by the piano on that P2 on Skyline looking towards that one bomb. I think it's B bomb. And Slasher was like behind a table. You could really only see like the top of the head. He just freaking snapped right on it and beamed him. And I was like, oh, whoa. That one really stuck out to me as just like an example. Like, yeah, these guys can shoot straight. They know what they're doing gunny wise. But they're gonna have to learn how to play and develop if they're gonna see success. And that's what these, especially for this team, like that, these online matches, this is where they're going to get their best practice that they've ever had in their lives competing. And how they're able to take the information from these games that they're playing, how they're able to use that and grow and develop is going to be the key for them if they're going to be successful.
And they really just struggled. They could have went 3-0 in hardpoint, to be honest, because they kind of threw away some of these matches. Like the opening hardpoint against Miami, they were up 230 to 221, and then Miami scores like goes like 30 to 4 or something to close out the map, and they lose. Something similar happened against Carolina. They were up once they got to 200 points. It was a really close match. They ended up losing by 14 in the second hard point. It was a 180 to 175 game going into like the third rotation of hills, and then they just got smoked on the last two hills by Carolina. They lose that first hard point. So, I think that's a really competitive series. Like even if they're 1-6, but they, like I said, they look like a normal CDL team, not like four Jimmys just coming off the street and getting absolutely smoked. Like it wasn't that, and I think that's a positive sign. And hopefully they can just get better. Even like the practice that they're getting over here on a consistent basis should be so much higher than they would have gotten elsewhere. So that'll help a bit, big time. Two teams I want to talk about, and we can kind of lump them together, is Vancouver and Miami. They both went 1-1 this weekend. Vancouver, they went to Game 5, round 11 both times. They win one, they lose one. They lost to Toronto, which they were more competitive against the Ultra than FaZe was, which is a pretty good sign for them. Miami, they also go to Game 5, round 11. They lose, and that's pretty much the difference. They could have gone 2-0 had that round 11 gone differently. So what did you make of these two teams who are kind of wild cards in of itself? Like I didn't think that they would necessarily be the top teams in the league, but they definitely were very competitive in week 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of like what we have talked about, just like middle of the pack, sort of seeing who separates themselves out from the other squads in that group over the course of the season. Again, small sample size here, but um, yeah, I think especially like the match between Miami and Vancouver itself, like it wasn't like one-sided, and we were split on who we picked, and it came down to another Game 5, round 11, where literally 0-4 was like in a situation on the bomb. I believe Vancouver was on offense, and they had the bomb playing, and he had to get 2 kills like on the bomb to seal it. And I think like one guy was left, but he wasn't close enough to the bomb to get the diffuser or anything like that, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it's like these teams have that potential to be really good, and they also have the potential to be just in the middle of the pack where they're winning some games and losing some games, and that's kind of what we saw. Like we saw Miami beat Vegas, and then they lose to Vancouver. We see uh, Vancouver, who's why am I already forgetting? Oh, Vancouver's first match is against Toronto, and I think that was probably closer than um, some of us would have thought, especially after Toronto beats Atlanta, right? So, um, yeah, it's one that's tough. That game 5 round 11 could have went Vancouver's way too. I'm pretty sure there was a bunch of kills traded on like the low bomb site there in protocol, but I believe no, I think Kleenex got first blood and then got traded, or it was vice versa. But regardless, yeah, it's just two teams. Like, I think Vancouver, like I said, their 0-4 had like a game-winning play against Miami, and that's one thing we highlighted heading into the season where you said like Abuza and 0-4 are the guys coming back from the previous roster. If they're going to be successful, those guys gotta play well, and that's an example of 0-4 coming up clutch when he needed to there. And then for Miami, man, Real really played well, especially in that loss to uh, Vancouver with a 1.5 KD for the L. That's just tough. And I believe Rencor, I know their first match was uh, against Vegas, but Rencor had 1.07 in his debut too. So he did um the post game interview after that match, I believe, and he seemed like just a guy who's excited to get an opportunity to be in the pro league, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. I think he played well, given the opportunity that we saw from him, and that could be. Um, I don't remember. I'm mixing up where I heard it. I think they mentioned it on broadcast how like now like Metals is just going to be full time sub with Real, and Rencor is going to be on the AR with Lucky, and that could like be something that helps take Metals to the next level. And Metals was already having some good moments leading into this year, so. Um, yeah, maybe there's still room to grow. Obviously, again, yeah, that we didn't even have a full year from Real. We have 2 matches from Rancor and even Lucky and Metals. Like they were in the CDL very briefly previously, but they don't have, at most they have 1+ years of experience in the CDL. And yeah, I think they can still be a competitive team. Like the coaches poll had them, pretty highly as well. But I think both these teams, Vancouver and Miami, are teams that should be in the middle of the pack, all things considered. If things are going the way they should, but if they're able to elevate their gameplay and continue to develop, like I mean, if Real is continuing to drop 1.5 KDs, I don't think most of those are going to have an L attached to them afterwards. But we'll just have to see how things continue to develop for these squads.
Yeah, that's my main takeaway was Real just looked incredible. Granted, like they haven't played the top teams, so like that'll be a big test. If he can kind of continue some of the play, then I don't know what the sky is for him at that point. Like if he's able to play even like remotely this well against really high level competition, like there will be like top level teams looking at him like maybe we can get him at some point. Like he played so well this weekend. So really happy for him. Like he seems like it's ridiculous that he was on Carolina and it didn't work out because of the visa issues and how much better of a team they probably would have been last season and maybe even this season if and granted Carolina is 2-0, so you can't say much better than that, but Real just looked incredible. 2 more teams that we need to talk about, obviously, Toronto and LAT. I think they looked the strongest of the teams this weekend. Toronto just pummeling FaZe. I think that's pretty clear to say. S&D, red card S&D in particular, they look really good. Your boy Kleenex looked like a star. And then LAT, that's kind of to be expected. That we like this was a team that I picked to win champs, and I think a lot of people believe that they can be the champs this season. And this week was a good proof of concept, I guess, even with a little bit of struggles with FaZe in the back half of the the series to close the week. They look incredible. So, where are you seeing Toronto or LAT? Any changes in the opinions or any kind of, I'm not like Toronto just seemed better than I expected, but maybe I was too low on them to begin with.
No, I mean, hey, that's what I'm thinking the same thing here. Like when we did our power rankings, it feels like a while ago now, but that was really only 2 episodes ago, so it was last week.
Mm-hmm.
When we did them, I had Toronto as my fourth team, and I was kind of like, maybe other people have them lower, maybe they don't have them as highly. Then the coaches poll came out, and they had them around the same spot in 4-5, and that made me feel better about it. And then after watching them play, I feel really good about where I had them. Joe Deceives and Beans in particular played really well. I think I'm not looking at the stats right now while I say this. I could be totally wrong. I want to say this first, and then I'll pull up the stats for each math, but I feel like if I look at these scorecards after the fact and Insight was statistically the worst player on the team for both matches, I wouldn't be surprised. Like I feel like Kleenex had his moments and the other two guys really popped off in certain situations. And I feel like that's like kind of like, when Insight came into the Toronto team originally, he was the rookie and he definitely had some pop off moments. But again, that was on a team where you had Cammy in MVP form in Cold War, and Kleenex was playing very well, and Bance was kind of like that guy who like was the glue guy doing what needed to be done. He wasn't necessarily dropping 1.5s or anything like that. And now if Insight's able to like, I mean, I don't think take a step back is the right word here, but like if Insight's able to just do what is necessary of a main AR and have those other three guys dropping crazy numbers around him, like that's a dangerous recipe, I feel like, for this Boston team. So I want to pull up the Breaking Point. Shout out Breaking Point for the stats. I guess technically he did have the fewest kills for Toronto against Atlanta, so I guess I'm totally not crazy on that front. And then he had the lowest kills for Toronto too against Vancouver, but he had a 1.1 KD. So, we always profess here on the Ego Chall stats aren't everything, but I think general feeling there for what I was feeling is kind of on the money. And again, small sample size, only 2 matches, could be a honeymoon phase for the team, yada yada. Mm-hmm. We'll have to see how it goes from here. The thing that stood out to me the most, though, for Toronto, and obviously you can say the win over FaZe, that yes, that definitely stood out to me and wasn't expected. But in the post-match interview, I believe for the Atlanta match, they were talking to Kleenex, and it might not have been after the Atlanta match. Regardless, though, there was a post-match interview for one of the 2 matches Toronto won this weekend with Kleenex, and to paraphrase what Kleenex essentially said was that he was saying that they were talking about playing with Joe Deceives now as the sub, and he was basically saying that he has to slow down a little bit because Joe Deceives is so fast. And if you're a longtime Call of Duty fan, like just hearing that sentence out loud, regardless of how exactly it was worded, just the notion of Kleenex having to slow down to play with another sub who is faster. I feel like if I had said that, like the only person that would come to mind would be a Beezy, if a Beezy and Kleenex were playing together. Like hearing that is like something Kleenex has to adjust to. Playing with Joe Deceives is just kind of mind-blowing to me, and that's also scary at the same time. Like I feel like a more methodical Kleenex even could be like really just like almost like Super Saiyan Kleenex or next versions or evolved, however you want to say it, for Kleenex, because he's still gonna have his moments where he's flying around the map and going fast and just doing what we know the tissue is gonna be able to do. But if he's able to also have those moments where Joe Deceives is just going rogue and he's playing behind him and playing a little more slow and structured and making sure he's getting the trades, and then kind of like Joe Deceives flies out, gets 1 or 2 kills or whatever, dies, Kleenex follows him up, gets that trade, then gets the next kill. Like I feel like that just opens up the map so much for Toronto, and that could really be a strong recipe for success for this team. So hearing Kleenex say that was really just like, wow, I can't even believe that's being said. But it's also at the same time just an incredibly dangerous thought for what this new sub duo on Toronto could kind of unlock for Kleenex and the team as a whole. So I'm really excited. I already, like you said, I like Kleenex a lot. I like watching him play. Now after hearing that and thinking about it and even just like saying this out loud, I'm even more excited to watch Toronto play going forward.
Yeah, Toronto, like every single time, they seem to create an iteration of their roster that's able to compete, even if on paper it might not be the most exciting. I mean, like I don't think this team, especially when you have Scrap and Envoy last season, like that's an all-star, like super team kind of vibe. Like bringing in Joe and bringing in Beans was not that. It was more these guys can fit with our current players, our existing team. They can kind of fit and mold together and be a better team, or be a good team. And maybe we don't have the star value, but we're going to be a good team nonetheless. And they showed that this weekend. They are now 2-0 and sitting in a tie for first place, along with Carolina and LAT and Minnesota. Like that's really great. And I was surprised, and maybe when we do our power rankings again, I'm gonna have to definitely adjust where Toronto is in relation to the rest of the league. But yeah, what were you saying?
You kind of lumped in LA Thieves there, and we've kind of talked about them
Mm-hmm.
indirectly, but I just think in general they looked amazing. Like I said when we were going over the FaZe match, there was a point there where I thought that LAT was going to 3-0 FaZe tonight, and obviously again FaZe made it more competitive and made it into a really good match. So that was good to see from a FaZe perspective, but from an LA Thieves perspective, like they had 200-point club hard points this week. I mean I have all the scores here down. For every match, and I really don't remember any other 100-point clubs. Like there were some that were close. I think like maybe the Optic C9. Yeah, Optic C9 was even 250, 130. So like there were some close, but I'm pretty confident in saying that LA Thieves had the 200-point clubs in hardpoint. I'm just scrolling through the scores here. Yeah, Optic had another 250, 136 against Boston. So Optic was close, but not quite 100-point club. Regardless, LA Thieves looked really dangerous, and that's kind of what we were saying. Like, that's just how good is this LA Thieves team going to be? The expectation is championships, plural, multiple. And based on what we saw from them, that's definitely a possibility. So that's encouraging for Nadeshot and crew. Um, on a, obviously Hydra played incredible and had some really strong moments in these opening matches, but I just think it's worth highlighting because it was one of our storylines from last episode. Is Envoy in particular had a 1.18? Is that an 8? I can't.
6.
My eyes are already missing.
1.16 KD.
Against
Oh, that was his total KD this weekend.
Cloud. Okay, he had a 1.18 against Cloud9 and a 1.15 against
Yeah.
FaZe, and he had 100 kills against FaZe. I feel like I'm not going to do it again, but I feel like if I went back and looked at Toronto series last year, if you told me there were 0 series where Envoy had 100 kills last year, I would probably believe you, unless maybe like one of the grand finals or something where it was a 7-game series or more maps played. But regardless, that's a really encouraging sign for something we talked about. Envoy having like a comeback player of the year type year. Already looks strong and a potential candidate for that made up award that we made up.
Yeah, like just looking at his stats, like he actually had more engagements per 10 minutes than Hydra did in Control,
Wow.
which is like kind of crazy because if you look at Hardpoint, Hydra's so far ahead of everybody. But in Control, Envoy's got a 1.07 and just as many or just a little bit more engagement. Like that, I don't know, like they remind me, and obviously like we're like it's kind of an overreaction, but I think we both know that they're going to be really good, or that this team's going to be really good. It kind of seems like when KD joined the Warriors, it's like, all right, like this is kind of nutty. Like this can get a little too insane where like pick your poison essentially when you're playing them, because Hydra and Scrap are 2 of like the 4 best players or 5 best players, however you want to put it. Ghosty, just a really good, really solid AR. And then if Envoy is like, if he can recapture what he had with LAT before, like they're almost unstoppable. Granted, there are super teams that if they're playing at their highest level will give them a run for their money, and it will be like the Avengers basically. Like these two teams are if the top three, and if Toronto is able to kind of unlock something with slower tissue, then I guess we'll see. Like it's pretty exciting. I think like even more exciting than last season because the talent was a little more spread out, but this one is like it's so concentrated on LAT that I think it's really exciting, and I kind of want to see how high they can go. Granted, week one there will be some struggles. I'm sure there will be some rough patches, but week one was about as good as it gets for LAT fans. Just overall thoughts and opinions on the meta and the maps. As you know, this is the first official weekend of action. Obviously, we've seen stuff in scrims or ranked play or just streams in general. But to see it in action, I thought, one, I've already seen enough Vault for the rest of my life. That map was played incessantly. The meta is pretty usual. Like, there's not much, and that's by design with the GAs. So any takeaways from week one for you in regards to the meta and maps?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to break it to you, but at least based on what we have right now, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Vault going forward, and I don't think that's changing. The one thing on a similar note that definitely did jump out to me is that Vault was literally played as the control map in every single series this weekend. It is worth noting that there are only two control maps in the rotation right now. The other is Protocol, so simply Protocol was vetoed by every other team, and Vault was played. The notion that we already know Hacienda is coming in to the map pool after the holiday break. I don't believe it's been confirmed what modes it is going to be played for, but I would almost automatically just think that Hacienda will be used for all three modes, hardpoint, search, and control. The only caveat to that is that Hacienda was a Black Ops 4 map. Black Ops 4 competitively was 5v5, not 4v4. So there could be some weird things with spawns because it's going to be a map that, naturally had just two more players on it from a competitive standpoint all those years back. So it might be some adjustments that need to be made from that to definitely say like it's surefire all three maps, map mode combo inclusion. But nonetheless, especially where there's only two controls, I almost feel like Hacienda control has to be used unless it's just absolutely unplayable. So that definitely did jump out to me. I think from a meta standpoint, we've talked about GAs at length. It was mostly the AMES, AMES, AR being used on the AR front, the Jackal PDW used as the sub. The Jackal was like the really good sub in the beta. Then it I think they said like they were addressing it either during the beta, like between weekends 1 and 2, or they said it after the beta before launch, and it's still just the best sub. So that's interesting to see. It's still, I feel like, again, we were talking about GAs where there were points where it was just 8 ARs on the map when like the XM4 was still being used and stuff. So it's good to at least see a sub being used, and some situations like on Vault there are multiple subs being used as opposed to just 4 ARs by both teams. But yeah, nonetheless, I think outside of just all the Vault controls, that probably has to be addressed, and I think it will most likely be addressed heading into the holiday break or after the holiday break. But I do think I've said this to like the guys while I've been playing pubs and stuff in Black Ops 6. I think Rewind is a better map than other people feel. Like I feel like a lot of people just in the community, not even the competitive community, just like the pub community in general, don't like Rewind. And for whatever reason, I've kind of like, I'm not saying it's my favorite map ever, it's the best map in the game or anything like that, but I just had like this notion that like it feels like other people really didn't like it, and I was kind of like, I don't think it's as bad as some people think. And after seeing it, especially in Search this weekend, and especially that banger Rewind hardpoint we saw between LA Thieves and FaZe, I think it's safe to say that I still think Rewind is a better map than other people give it credit for. So will be interesting to see if that's continued to be played. But yeah, I mean, red card is kind of just like it's. I feel like red card is in until it gets replaced by something else, maybe Hacienda. But also you could say the same thing about protocol, at least from some perspectives, like the protocol S&D. That one bomb site under the map, that's kind of just like a who gets in there first. And if you don't have a trophy system and you get hit by stuns and nades, like you're just gonna lose because they're gonna get control of that site. And I do think from like a search and destroy enthusiast perspective, I like when not all of the maps are just defensive favored. I do like when there's a mix in there of a map that if you get the bomb down and lock it down, like you can win, and that can open up some interesting strategies from a veto perspective and stuff like that. So I really like that aspect of it, but I do think it's gonna get repetitive if we see protocol S&D just 11 rounds of offensive wins where the offensive team is sprinting underground and planting the bomb as fast as possible. There, I do have to say, I think it was in the Vancouver Toronto series where Vancouver like made a sprint push for the other bomb site, and there's like a helicopter by that bomb site. And yeah, it was Vancouver. I think it was against Toronto, and like O4 was in the helicopter, and it was like unshootable. Like you could not shoot him out of that helicopter facing it. You basically have to flank to like get a better angle of it. So that was kind of like, yeah, I guess it makes sense why all the teams are flooding underground, but um yeah, I kind of just yapped there a little bit, but I do think initial impressions are the map pool inevitably could be improved, and hopefully Hacienda is at least that short term, uh, you know, sort of fix or stabilization that we get in some capacity, and then as more maps get added, then maybe the map pool will continue to develop. Hopefully, we get like a Raider standoff or some of the other classics in there, and uh, gameplay wise, the game was enjoyable to watch, and I feel like there were a lot of like um interesting gunfights and stuff like that. So I think we get some of that the Black Ops 6 feel and gunplay on some of these staple maps. Like could be in for a really good year.
I saw a tweet from Doug Lieb, who I think he used to work for LAG, and he does like data analysis for COD, and he said a couple random thoughts after 2 days of CDL. Hardpoint is too fast, and I think that was one of his points, and I thought it was interesting just because like it is like it really is too fast in a lot of ways because it doesn't feel like the punishment if you get team wiped or you get like thrown out of the hill, it doesn't feel like it's as great of a punishment as it probably should be. Like if the hill gets broken and you go 3 down in some of the past games, and I'm gonna sound like a boomer now, but like in some of the past games, like that's kind of like a death knell. Like that's 20-30 points that you just lost. But in modern COD, it's like nothing because like it's almost like you're right back in the action immediately. And then I saw Brian Saint, obviously the head coach and GM of the Carolina Royal Ravens, and he replied to that tweet, and they said, they cooked my boy Slasher for saying we should try scrimming with an extra second of respawn delay in hardpoint to see how it plays weeks ago. So it does seem like we need to, maybe adopt the Slasher World League. Maybe we need to get it back in there. I think it's an interesting point, like, to try to slow the hard points down where making bad plays or being reckless and just playing so fast, it can have its drawbacks and it can be a punishment by itself. So maybe that's something that will be put in place or, come at a later point, but probably not. I just thought it was an interesting point that was brought up by those guys. But yeah, the maps are going to be bad. Like, it's there's just too few, and that's a modern COD thing as well. Like competitive maps are just so far and few between, it feels like. And we're relying on Hacienda to come in and like save the day and help us out, but there's no guarantee that it will play the same way or that it will really be the map that we need it to be.
Head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor said in chat, Hacienda has been ruined due to the window above connector. So I haven't played it, and I don't know what window he's talking about, but obviously if Tremmy's saying that, that's definitely puts a dimmer on what I was hoping out of Hacienda coming into the match ball.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's how it goes every time. Like they bring something back, but it's never the same.
And they
And
added doors, now they're adding windows. Like,
yeah. So the standings as we go through, so we're obviously just through week 1 of the qualifiers, but each team played 2 matches this weekend. We have a 4-way tie for first place: Carolina Royal Ravens, Toronto Ultra, LA Thieves, and Minnesota Rocker. Then there's a 4-way tie for fifth place, all with 10 points. They all went 1-1 this weekend. That's Optic Texas, Miami Heretics, Vancouver Surge, and Boston Breach. And then 4 0-2 teams, all with 0 CDL points. That is the Los Angeles Gorillas Mate, Atlanta FaZe, Vegas Falcons, and Cloud9 New York. Obviously, the 4 teams we all expected to be at the bottom of the CDL after week 1. But there's a lot of time to go. I think we have one more week of qualifiers, and then we have the minor and then a break, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe the minor is after the break. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure there are like 2 weeks of online qualifiers, and then there is a pretty sizable like 3 to 4 week break for the holidays, and then we'll be back in sometime in January to finish up the qualifiers before Major 1. But we will be back nonetheless next week. Well, real quick, pick 'em. Not our greatest week, I will say. It's maybe not a good sign for the rest of the year. But
it's really just day 1.
Yeah. I went 7-5. You went 8-4. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. I thought this was kind of a surprising week 1. There weren't too many surprises last year, if I remember correctly. I think it was a kind of chalk week 1, but this one was definitely not that. And it's going to be an interesting year, I feel like.
Jeremy just said in chat we got to bring him back.
I mean, he's 0-1 lifetime, so I don't know. When you're winless, there's not a lot of incentive to bring him back. But
before we wrap it up, I just want to run through all the results real quick, just say what they were, to make sure we actually said it. So just on Friday, Minnesota beat General Mates 3-2, Boston beat Optic 3-2, Carolina beat Vegas 3-1, and Toronto beat Atlanta 3-1. On Saturday, we had Miami 3-0 Vegas, Minnesota beat Boston 3-2, Toronto beat Vancouver 3-2, LA Thieves beat C9 3-1, and then today, Sunday, December 8th, Carolina beats General Mates 3-1, Vancouver beats Miami 3-2, Optic 3-0 C9, and then LAT avoid the reverse sweep and beat Atlanta 3-2.
Alrighty then. We will have, I believe, another 2 matches per team next week, if I'm not mistaken. But we will be back on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, for the live show. So if you want to watch it live, we'll be streaming the show. Should be like 10, 11 p.m. Wednesday evening. But the best way to make sure that you can catch that live stream is to follow the Twitch stream, which is twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. You could look up Ego Chall Podcast on YouTube. We live stream all of our podcasts there. We're doing 2 shows a week, reminders. So we'll be back on Wednesday night, or if you're a fan of the podcast version, we will be uploading them Thursday morning. So we will be back then. Make sure to subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. They're on YouTube as well. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2 Ks, at Preston Byers, podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. And we will be back Wednesday night for the live show, Thursday morning for the podcast. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. For those who enjoyed the YouTube version and whatnot, Preston's also experimenting a little bit, it looks like, with some more short form clip-esque videos, just taking components out of the live show and the full hour plus length version of the video. So maybe you don't have as much time, or you just want to see like some little snippets on certain topics or whatever. Check that out on the YouTube channel. We're up to 154 subscribers now, so slowly but steadily gaining a little bit of subscribers there. So thank you guys for all that, showing love and whatnot there. But yeah, season's officially underway, and the content's just going to keep coming from here. So thanks as always, and we'll see you back here when we're live again. As always, remember to send the chow.